In the gospel today, when Jesus had finished praying, he said, "Lazarus, come out." Jesus says to each of us also, come out of your tomb. Come out of your bondage. Do not live in darkness, live in the light. Do not live in fear, live in faith. When Lazarus came out of the tomb, Jesus then said, "Unbind him, let him go free." Jesus also says to each of us, be unbound and go free. Live with my life. If Jesus can restore a body that had been in the tomb for 4 days and has begun to decompose, he can certainly mend the brokenness and wounds of our lives. Jesus asked the same questions of us as he asked Martha. Do you believe this? Do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life? Do you believe that I can mend all brokenness and wounds of your life? Do you believe that I am not only offering your resurrection in the future, but also the fullness of life now in the present? Jesus proclaims that he is both the resurrection and the life. He promises future resurrection, but also he invites us to share now in the fullness of his life. The resurrection of Lazarus is not just a promise about the future of each of us. It is also an invitation from Jesus to enter into the fullness of his life in the present, right now, that life will continue in us after death. And how do we achieve this freedom? How do we get out of our tomb? Notice that Martha and Mary sent a message to Jesus. We too have sent a message to Jesus, and we do this by spending time with him in prayer and sharing with him our wounds, our hurts, and our anxieties. Let us keep no secrets from Jesus, but lay all bare before him. So then, as we share our wounds and anxieties with Jesus, we ask him to walk back in time with us to the moment of our wounding and heal it. Then Jesus calls us out of our tomb to a new life. Now notice that when Jesus received the message about Lazarus' illness, he stayed there for 2 more days. Now we expect God to answer God in our time, but sometimes God's time is different from ours. Also, sometimes we may be tempted to despair and say to God, he cannot do anything for me. This is like Martha in the gospel, who objected to the stone being removed. But Jesus replied, have I not told you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Jesus is constantly calling each one of us to new life, to come forth from whatever is keeping us in bondage. Sometimes a hurt we thought had been healed in prayer may resurface again months and years later. This is a grace from God. God is now inviting us to a deeper healing of that situation. Jesus called Lazarus out of the tomb, but Jesus himself did not unbind him. Others unbound him. When we meet Jesus in prayer, he calls us out of our tomb and lets our spouse, our family, and our friends unbind us. Christ comes to each one of us through people in our lives, so expect it. How can we live this life of Jesus now? This trust? Jesus offers us life every time we come to Mass, every time we receive the sacraments, every time we pray, and every time we read the sacred scriptures. The sacraments are special ways we meet Jesus. In the sacraments, we touch Jesus and Jesus comes to us. Now, we also heard today the shortest verse in the New Testament. 2 words: Jesus wept. Jesus Christ is not a distant God. Look how intimately Martha and Mary treat him. He never relinquishes his lordship. They never forget that he is the Lord, but he is unlike any other Lord. He not only gives us protection, security, life, and peace, but he gives us his very sacred heart. The heart of Christ yearns for each one of us, to give him as much love and confidence as Mary and Martha, yearning to be let into the presence of our hearts, so as to share in our sorrows and our troubles. No other God ever shared our tears. Only Christ Emmanuel, God with us. Now, Martha professed her faith in the resurrection, but Jesus encouraged her faith by saying, "I am the resurrection and the life." When he asked Martha if he believed this, she responded by making an act of faith in his divinity. "I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is to come into the world." You and I can make this same act of faith in the person of Jesus. Then we need to choose him to be part of our life every day. This means coming out of our tomb, of our sinfulness, and living for Jesus now, believing in his promise that we will share in the glory of his resurrection forever. He came into our world so that we would be able to enter into his world. Heaven is for us, the promised land. As St. Paul tells us in the Philippians, our citizenship is in heaven. So many today are entombed in that spiritual death that our wayward society is bringing each soul. We are stuck in selfishness and in seeking an ease and pleasure. So often we try to fight against God rather than peacefully and gratefully accepting his will in our life. But Jesus told his disciples that the death of Lazarus was for the glory of God. Neither they nor the sisters of Lazarus could understand what this meant, until after the Lord brought the dead man back to life. We too fail to see God's will in the events of our lives until well after the fact that we can look back and see the good he brings to our situations. This requires that we take the focus off ourselves and keep our focus squarely on God, trusting in him and having faith in him. This is not only how we die to ourselves, but more importantly, it is how we rise from our self-imposed spiritual death and to be restored in faith in Jesus. Now, death is the great equalizer. It comes for everyone and it brings an end to all illusions. And yet Jesus is the Lord of death. He has conquered death. With Jesus, death is just a door to the truer life. So many fear it and so many avoid talking about it. But with Jesus at our side, we have nothing to fear. As good disciples, let us listen to Jesus as we were instructed by God the Father at the Transfiguration. He calls each of us from our spiritual tomb and says, "Come out and believe in me. Trust me and surrender your life to me. And everlasting life will be yours."